3 weeks ago, I stood in front of our marriage counselor's house at 11:43 p.m., shaking uncontrollably as rain soaked through my clothes. I wasn't there for therapy. I was there with printouts of GPS coordinates, timestamps, and location data that proved my husband of 12 years had been sleeping with her for months, including on our anniversary. The look on both their faces when they opened the door and saw me standing there with 128 pages of meticulously organized evidence will stay with me forever. But the most devastating part wasn't catching them together. It was discovering that the person who was supposed to be helping save our marriage was the same person destroying it from the inside. You probably think I'm crazy for tracking my husband like that. Maybe I am. But let me tell you how a software engineer with access to a Tesla's API can uncover betrayal in ways most people never imagine. And how sometimes the very technology that's meant to keep us connected is what exposes the most painful truths. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how things that seemed insignificant became the breadcrumbs leading to the most devastating discovery of my life. I'm Emily, 35. Software engineer for a major tech company in Seattle. I've been married to David for 12 years. He's 37, works in pharmaceutical sales, and travels frequently for work. We have 2 kids, Lily, who's 8, and Max, who's 6. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family in our suburban home with the Tesla Model Y in the driveway that we bought last year as a family investment. Things had been good between us. At least I thought so. We'd had our rough patches like any couple, especially after Max was born when I struggled with postpartum depression. But we worked through it, or so I believed. The first signs something was off came 4 months ago. David had always been attached to his phone, but suddenly it was like an extension of his hand. He'd take it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, and I'd catch him angling the screen away when I walked by. Classic red flag, right? But I told myself it was work stress. His company was launching a new drug, and the pressure was intense. One night in early March, I walked into our bedroom and caught him ending a call. "Just work," he said quickly. But something about the way he avoided eye contact sent alarm bells ringing through my body. That sick feeling in my stomach. That instinct that something isn't right. It's never wrong, is it? But here's where it gets interesting. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw accusations. Instead, I started paying attention. And what I noticed was a pattern that didn't make sense. David would tell me he had to stay late at his regional office downtown, but our Tesla would show up at home on the app while he wasn't there. He'd take Ubers some nights instead of driving. He claimed he was at conferences, but would post nothing on social media when normally he'd share updates from industry events. These inconsistencies might seem obvious reading them now, but when you're in it, when it's your life, your marriage, you find ways to rationalize the unexplainable. Maybe the car tracker was glitching. Maybe he was too busy to post. Maybe. What you need to understand is that I didn't want to be the jealous, suspicious wife. I wanted to trust my husband. After all, we were actually making progress. We'd started seeing a marriage counselor, Dr. Rebecca Wilson, who David had found through a colleague. We'd been going for about 3 months, working on communication issues that had developed over the years. But then came the turning point. It was a Tuesday evening in April when David told me he had to fly to Chicago for a 3-day conference. He kissed me goodbye, and I watched our Tesla back out of the driveway as he headed to the airport. That night, while the kids were asleep, I was working on a project when I got a notification from our home security system. Motion detected in the garage. Thinking it might be an animal or a glitch, I checked the camera feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Our Tesla was parking itself in the garage, but David was supposed to be on a plane to Chicago. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips as I pulled up the Tesla app on my phone. According to the app, the car had just completed a 27-minute drive. But from where? And if the car was here, Where was David? I wish I could tell you I immediately confronted him, but I didn't. Something inside me needed more proof, needed to understand exactly what was happening before I made any accusations. And that's when the engineer in me took over. Here's something most people don't realize about Teslas. They're basically computers on wheels, constantly collecting and transmitting data. And if you have access to the right APIs and know what you're doing, that data can tell you a lot more than just how much charge is left in the battery. That night, while David was supposedly in Chicago, I did something I never thought I'd do in my marriage. I wrote a script to access our Tesla's data through the owner API, not just the basic information from the app, but detailed GPS coordinates, timestamps, and location history. It wasn't technically difficult for someone with my skills, but emotionally, it felt like crossing a point of no return. The next morning, I dropped the kids at school and called in sick to work. Then I sat at my kitchen table and started analyzing the data I'd collected. What I found made me physically ill. For the past 3 months, while David was supposedly at late meetings or on business trips, the Tesla had been regularly visiting an address in Queen Anne, an upscale residential neighborhood about 25 minutes from our home. The car would typically arrive around 8:30 p.m. and leave around 11:30 p.m., or sometimes not until the early morning hours. The pattern was consistent. Twice a week, sometimes more. But here's what really broke me. I cross-referenced the dates with our shared calendar and discovered that on our anniversary, when David had called to say his flight was delayed and he'd be stuck in Denver overnight, the Tesla had been parked at this mystery address from 7:22 p.m. until 5:47 a.m. the next morning. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type as I entered the address into Google Maps. The street view showed a beautiful craftsman-style house with a manicured lawn. But it wasn't until I zoomed in on the small sign by the door that my entire world collapsed around me. Dr. Rebecca Wilson, licensed marriage and family therapist, our marriage counselor, the woman who had been nodding sympathetically as I shared my deepest insecurities about our relationship, the woman who had been giving us communication exercises to rebuild trust. She was sleeping with my husband. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left but bitter bile and betrayal. But what you'll find most shocking is what I did next. I didn't confront David immediately. I didn't call Dr. Wilson and scream at her. Instead, I went deeper into investigation mode, gathering more data, building a complete picture of the betrayal. Over the next week, I expanded my surveillance. I created a more sophisticated tracking system that would alert me whenever the Tesla arrived at specific locations. I reviewed credit card statements and found charges at restaurants near her house on nights he was supposedly working late. I even found hotel charges on days he claimed to be at conferences, hotels just 15 minutes from our home. During this time, David returned from his Chicago trip, acting completely normal. He brought the kids souvenirs and showed me photos he'd taken of the Chicago skyline. Photos I later found were downloaded from a stock image site when I checked his search history. We even had another counseling session with Dr. Wilson, where she looked me in the eye and asked how I was feeling about the progress in our marriage. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Both of them sitting there, discussing intimacy and honesty, while I sat silently, a volcano of rage building inside me. What's worse is that they were careless. Reviewing the Tesla data, I found instances where they'd used the car's autopilot feature on the way to her house, probably so they could kiss or touch each other while the car practically drove itself. The autopilot records showed disengagements and steering overrides that made sense only if the driver was distracted. They were so confident in their deception, they weren't even being careful anymore. 2 weeks after my discovery, I had compiled an extensive dossier of evidence. Not just car location data, but credit card statements, phone records. Yes, I had accessed those too. And even some text messages I'd recovered from our shared cloud backup. The picture was crystal clear and devastating. My husband and our therapist had been having an affair for at least 3 months, possibly longer. I considered many ways to confront them. I thought about sending the evidence to the licensing board that oversaw marriage therapists. I thought about hiring a lawyer and blindsiding David with divorce papers. I even had a moment, just a moment, where I considered more destructive options that I'm not proud of, but ultimately I decided on something different, something that would force them to face me and the truth simultaneously. On a Friday night when David told me he had a client dinner, I tracked the Tesla to her house, arriving at 8:17 p.m. I waited until 11:43 p.m., sitting in my car down the street, watching the rain fall against my windshield, feeling strangely calm despite the storm inside me. Then I walked up to her front door with a waterproof folder containing 128 pages of meticulously organized evidence. I rang the doorbell and waited. The look on their faces when they opened the door together is something I'll never forget. David in his unbuttoned shirt, Dr. Wilson in a silk robe. The shock, the instantaneous guilt, the realization that there was absolutely no way to explain this away. "I think we need an emergency therapy session," I said, my voice steadier than I thought possible. "I've brought some materials I'd like to discuss." What happened next was 3 hours of the most intense confrontation you can imagine. There were tears, mostly theirs. There were confessions. There were pathetic attempts at justification. David claimed he'd felt unappreciated at home. Dr. Wilson said their relationship had developed unexpectedly, and that she'd been planning to refer us to another therapist, as if that somehow made her betrayal less egregious. Throughout it all, I remained surprisingly composed, methodically going through my evidence, asking pointed questions, forcing them to face the detailed timeline of their deception. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. That would come later, in private. In that moment, I needed them to understand the depth of their betrayal and the consequences that would follow. "You'll be hearing from the licensing board," I told Dr. Wilson as I left. "And you," I said to David, "will be hearing from my lawyer." The aftermath has been both devastating and strangely liberating. The kids are still adjusting to the new reality, though I've shielded them from the ugliest details. David moved out immediately and has been desperately trying to reconcile, sending daily messages about how he made the biggest mistake of his life. Dr. Wilson's practice is under investigation by the licensing board, and from what I've heard, several other clients have come forward with concerns about her professional conduct. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. Some days the pain is still overwhelming. Other days I feel a growing sense of freedom and possibility. Last week I sold the Tesla. I couldn't stand looking at it anymore, knowing it had been an unwitting accomplice in their affair. The data it had collected was both the harbinger of heartbreak and my salvation from a marriage built on lies. I've had people ask me if I regret investigating, if I think I'd be happier not knowing. The answer is always no. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living in a carefully constructed fiction. In a final twist of irony, my technical skills, the very thing David often dismissed as my computer geek stuff, was what ultimately exposed his betrayal. The technology that helped him coordinate his affair also created the digital breadcrumbs that led me directly to the truth. So for anyone out there with that feeling in the pit of your stomach that something isn't right, trust your instincts. The truth leaves evidence, sometimes in the most unexpected places. And while finding it might break your heart, it can also set you free. As for the Tesla, the new owner has no idea about its history or the role it played in uncovering one of the most painful chapters of my life. But I did leave one thing behind, a small piece of code buried deep in its system that will trigger a yearly reminder. Trust data, not words, because in the end, the numbers don't lie, even when the people you love do. Just 2 days ago, I received an email from Dr. Wilson's husband. Apparently, he'd noticed similar patterns in their relationship and had questions about how I'd discovered the affair. I haven't responded yet. Part of me wants to help him find his own truth, but another part of me questions whether spreading more pain is the right thing to do. What would you do in my situation? Would you help him uncover what might be happening in his marriage? Or is it better to let some sleeping dogs lie? Either way, I've learned that in today's connected world, true privacy is an illusion. Our digital footprints tell the real story of our lives, whether we want them to or not. And sometimes, the cold, hard data reveals more truth than any heartfelt conversation ever could. I still have the complete record of every location that Tesla visited during their affair. Sometimes I find myself looking at the map of their movements, trying to understand how the man who promised to love me forever and the woman who promised to help heal our marriage could betray me so completely. I don't have those answers yet. Maybe I never will. But what I do have is the truth. And that's a solid foundation on which to build whatever comes next.